They say in Westeros that the sun bows to no one. And nowhere is this truer than in Dorne. Hello, my dear adventurers. Tonight, I'm taking you to the only kingdom in all of Westeros that has never been conquered. Not by the Targaryens and their dragons, not by ambitious kings, not by anyone. This is the story of House Martell, the princes and princesses of Dorne, whose very words tell you everything you need to know about their 1,000-year reign. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Close your eyes and let yourself drift to the southernmost reaches of the Seven Kingdoms, where the landscape transforms into something almost otherworldly. Endless deserts stretch beneath a merciless sun. Ancient fortresses rise from the sand like monuments to defiance itself. The air shimmers with heat, and in the distance, the water gardens glisten like a mirage. Though here, the impossible is very much real. This is a land where customs differ from the rest of Westeros, where women inherit thrones as readily as men, where passion runs as hot as the desert winds, and where one family turned the harshest corner of the continent into an unconquerable realm. Tonight, we'll trace their extraordinary saga, from ancient Rhoynar refugees who found sanctuary in the sands, to the princes who faced down dragons and won, to the tragedies and triumphs that shaped their destiny. So settle in, let the warmth of this tale embrace you, and drift off to the sound of a story as timeless as the desert itself. Let us begin with House Martell, and the land where the sun never sets on their pride. Long before dragons ever cast their shadows over Westeros, long before the Andals brought their faith of the Seven across the narrow sea, the land that would become Dorne was home to scattered tribes of the first men. They lived in the harsh environment of desert and mountain, carving out existence in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on the continent. Among the river valleys and coastal regions, petty kings and minor lords vied for control over precious water sources and fertile lands. It was during the coming of the Andals to Dorne that our story finds its first chapter. An adventurer named Oberyn Martell arrived on these southern shores, carrying with him the ambitions and warrior spirit of his people. Morgan was no king, no great conqueror with vast armies at his back. He was simply a man with vision and determination, seeking to carve out a place for himself and his descendants in this new land. Oberyn Martell settled between the mouth of the Greenblood River and the broken remnants of what was once called the Arm of Dorne, that ancient land bridge that had connected Westeros to the eastern continent of Essos before it shattered in some cataclysm lost to time. This strip of territory, roughly 50 leagues in length and 10 leagues wide, became the foundation of House Martell's power. It was neither the largest nor the richest domain in Dorne, but it was theirs. The early Martells were pragmatic rulers who understood their limitations. Unlike the proud kings of houses Ironwood, Jourdain, and Illyrian, the Martells styled themselves as lords, not monarchs. They paid homage to their more powerful neighbors, bending the knee when necessary to preserve their holdings. They were cautious vassals who knew when to fight and when to yield, when to speak and when to remain silent. This careful political maneuvering would become a hallmark of Martell rule in the centuries to come. For generations, House Martell remained a minor house, their golden spear banner flying over their modest holdings while greater powers dominated the Dornish political landscape. The Ironwoods controlled vast territories in the mountains. The Danes held ancient Starfall and wielded a sword said to be forged from a fallen star. The petty kings of the Greenblood commanded river traffic and trade. The Martells were players in this game, but not yet the masters of it. Their fortress, which would one day be known as Sunspear, was in these early days a more modest structure called the Sandship. Built to withstand both the elements and enemies, it sat near the sea, where cooling breezes could offer respite from the desert heat. The early lords of House Martell governed from this seat, presiding over their people with what contemporary accounts suggest was a mixture of sternness and fairness. The Martells developed relationships with the other Dornish houses through careful marriages, trade agreements, and military alliances when called upon. They served their overlords with loyalty, building a reputation for keeping their oaths. This reliability, this steadfastness in honoring commitments, would prove crucial when the moment came that would transform their house forever. For at this time, catastrophe was unfolding across the narrow sea in Essos, and that catastrophe would bring to Dorne's shores the woman who would elevate the Martells from minor lords to ruling princes of all Dorne. To understand how House Martell rose to dominance, we must turn our gaze eastward across the narrow sea to a civilization that once rivaled even the mighty Valyrian freehold in splendor and power. The Rhoynar were a people of the great river Rhoyne, which flowed through the heart of Essos like a silver serpent. Along its banks stood magnificent cities with names that rang like music: Nisar, Croyane, Sarmel, Saroy, and countless others. The Rhoynar were masters of water magic, engineers who built great bridges and aqueducts, artists who created works of breathtaking beauty. Their society was different from the Andal kingdoms of Westeros, or even the dragon lords of Valyria. Among the Rhoynar, women held equal status with men. They could inherit, they could rule, they could fight as warriors. This egalitarian approach to governance and society would, in time, reshape Dornish culture entirely. In the grand city of Nisar, there ruled a princess named Nymeria. Contemporary accounts describe her as a woman of exceptional intelligence, cunning, and leadership ability. She was not the warrior queen that songs would later paint her as, wielding sword and spear in personal combat. Rather, she was a commander of armies, a strategist who could read a battlefield like a scholar reads a text, a leader who inspired fierce loyalty in her followers. Nymeria needed every ounce of that skill and leadership, for her world was ending. The Valyrian freehold, that empire of dragon lords and sorcerers, had set its sights on the Rhoyne. For years, there had been tensions and small conflicts between the Rhoynar cities and the Valyrian colonies along the coast. These erupted into full-scale war, what history would remember as the Rhoynish Wars. At first, the Rhoynar achieved victories. Prince Garin of Croyane, called Garin the Great, assembled an army of 250,000 soldiers and marched against the Valyrians. For a time, it seemed the Rhoynar might prevail through sheer numbers and determination. But Valyria's response was devastating and absolute. 300 dragons, commanded by the dragon lords themselves, descended upon Garin's host. Imagine, if you will, the sky darkening with wings that stretched wider than city streets. Imagine the sound of their roars echoing like thunder across the river plains. Imagine the smell of smoke and burning flesh as dragonfire turned day into night and brave soldiers into ash and cinders. Garin's army was annihilated. The prince himself was captured and taken in chains. The Valyrians were merciless in their victory, enslaving thousands upon thousands of the Rhoynar people. City after city fell to dragonfire and Valyrian steel. Nymeria understood that to remain was to face extinction. She gathered every ship that could float on the Rhoyne, from grand river galleys to humble fishing boats, from trading vessels to pleasure barges. She filled these ships with survivors, mostly women and children and the elderly, for most of the fighting men had perished with Garin's army. On the day she set sail, Nymeria led a fleet that legend claims numbered 10,000 ships. Modern scholars debate the exact number. Some suggest it may have been fewer, perhaps 1,000 vessels or even less, with the number inflated over centuries of retelling. But whether 1,000 or 10,000, it was a massive exodus of people fleeing certain death and slavery, trusting their lives to a princess who promised to find them a new home. What followed was a journey of unimaginable hardship. Nymeria first led her fleet to the Basilisk Isles, those plague-ridden islands south of Sotorios. The pirate kings who ruled there offered land, but only in exchange for the Rhoynar's ships, and a yearly tribute of 30 virgins for each king. Nymeria refused this barbaric demand and set sail once more. Next, they attempted to settle in Sotorios itself, landing at places with names like Zemeta and Yin. But Sotorios proved even more hostile than the Basilisk Isles. Diseases decimated the settlers. The jungle creatures were unlike anything they had encountered along the gentle Rhoynar. Slavers from Volantis and other cities raided their settlements. One by one, the new towns fell or were abandoned. Those who settled in Yin simply vanished without trace, swallowed by that cursed city of black stone. For 3 years, Nymeria's fleet wandered the southern seas. They found brief respite on Narth, the Isle of Butterflies, but were driven away by a terrible illness. They settled for a time on Abulu in the Summer Islands, which would thereafter be known as the Isle of Women, but the soil proved too poor to feed so many mouths. Some of Nymeria's followers, worn down by years of suffering, chose to return to Essos despite knowing they would likely be enslaved or killed. These unfortunates sailed back to their homeland and met exactly the fate they feared. But Nymeria never wavered in her determination to find a home for her people. Through storms and starvation, through plague and despair, she kept the fleet together and the hope alive. And finally, after years of wandering, she set her course northward to Westeros. The surviving ships, battered by weather and time, made landfall at the mouth of the Greenblood River in Dorne. Some vessels landed on the stepstones and were captured by slavers from Lys and Tyrosh. Others made it to the Dornish coast, but were scattered across different landing points. The main body of Nymeria's fleet, however, reached the Greenblood together. Nymeria stepped onto Dornish soil for the first time, and the course of history changed forever. When Nymeria arrived in Dorne around the year 700 before Aegon's conquest, the political landscape was fractured and contentious. Various petty kings and powerful lords controlled different regions. The strongest among them was House Ironwood, whose domains dwarfed those of most other Dornish houses. The Ironwood styled themselves as the true rulers of Dorne, and looked down upon lesser houses. Nymeria sought audience with these Dornish rulers, one by one. She came not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant, offering alliance and proposing that her people be allowed to settle on Dornish lands. She brought with her thousands of refugees, many of them women trained in the arts of war, as was Rhoynish custom, all of them desperate for a home after years of wandering. Most of the Dornish kings and lords turned her away. They saw only landless refugees, people with nothing to offer but empty mouths to feed. Some feared these foreigners would disrupt their established order. Others simply had no room or no desire to accommodate such a large influx of outsiders. Rejection after rejection met Nymeria's requests. But Lord Mors Martell saw what others did not. Mors, sometimes called Mors the Elder in later histories to distinguish him from his many descendants, ruled from the sandship over House Martell's modest holdings. When Nymeria came to him, he looked beyond the immediate circumstances and saw opportunity. Here was a warrior queen, beautiful and intelligent, leading an army of disciplined soldiers. Here were artisans and engineers with skills unknown in Westeros. Here was a chance to elevate his house from minor lordship to true power. According to legend, Mors fell in love with Nymeria the moment he saw her. Whether this was genuine romantic attraction or political calculation dressed in the language of courtly love, we cannot know. What we do know is that Mors proposed marriage almost immediately, and Nymeria accepted. The wedding of Mors Martell and Nymeria was more than a personal union. It was a merger of two peoples, two cultures, two ways of seeing the world. On the day of their wedding, Nymeria made a decision that would become legendary. She ordered her entire fleet burned. Imagine standing on that beach, watching 10,000 ships, or 1,000 ships, or whatever the true number was, all set ablaze simultaneously. The flames would have lit up the night sky like a second sun. The heat would have been felt for miles around. The smoke would have formed a pillar visible across half of Dorne. And the message was unmistakable and absolute. There would be no return to Essos. This was home now. This was where they would live, fight, and if necessary, die. Nymeria's decision to burn the ships has been interpreted in different ways by different scholars. Some see it as a practical measure to prevent desertion or mutiny among her followers, who might have been tempted to sail back to familiar lands. Others view it as a powerful symbolic gesture, a way of committing her people completely to their new home. Still others suggest it was a tactical choice, denying potential enemies the use of those vessels. Likely it was all of these things at once. With the fleet reduced to ash and memory, Nymeria and Mors Martell turned their attention to consolidating power in Dorne. They combined their symbols and their strength. The original Martell sigil had been a simple golden spear. Nymeria's Rhoynar had used the red sun as their emblem. Now these two symbols merged into the sigil we know today. A golden spear piercing a red sun, set against an orange field that represents the Dornish desert sands. The new combined house took the name Nymeria Martell, though in common usage it is simply called House Martell. The Martell-Rhoynar alliance now possessed something that few other Dornish houses could match: a professional, experienced army. Many of Nymeria's followers were women who had fought in the Rhoynish wars. They were trained soldiers, skilled with spear and bow. The Dornish houses might have looked down on the idea of women warriors, but they would soon learn to respect and fear them on the battlefield. Mors and Nymeria set out to unite all of Dorne under their rule, and they did so through a campaign that history remembers as Nymeria's War. The war to unite Dorne was neither quick nor easy. It lasted for years and tested the alliance between Mors Martell and Nymeria at every turn. They faced the entrenched power of ancient houses, the difficult terrain of mountains and desert, and the fierce independence of the Dornish character. Their first campaigns were against the smaller houses and petty kings, those with limited resources and no strong allies. Castle by castle, valley by valley, they brought the Dornish lords to heel. Some came willingly, seeing the writing on the wall and choosing to swear fealty before the choice was taken from them. Others resisted and were crushed by the combined might of Martell soldiers and Rhoynish warriors. The Rhoynar brought new tactics and strategies to Dornish warfare, They were experts at fighting in hot climates, at using terrain to their advantage, at guerrilla warfare that would much later prove so effective against Targaryen dragons. The Martell-Rhoynar army moved swiftly, struck hard, and often vanished into the desert before their enemies could mount effective counterattacks. But the greatest challenge came from House Ironwood. The Ironwoods were the most powerful house in Dorne, controlling vast territories in the Red Mountains and the regions beyond. Their seat at Ironwood was nearly impregnable, built into the mountain itself. King Yorick Ironwood, called Yorick Yellowtoad in some accounts, viewed the upstart Martells and their foreign allies with contempt. The conflict between Martell and Ironwood became intensely personal. In a duel that would become the stuff of legend, King Yorick Ironwood faced Lord Mors Martell in single combat. The two warriors met on the field of battle while their armies watched. Swords flashed in the desert sun. The clash of steel on steel rang out across the sand, and Mors Martell fell. Yorick Ironwood's blade found its mark, and the Lord of the Sandship died from his wounds. For a moment, it seemed Nymeria's dream might die with her husband. But the warrior queen had not come through years of wandering, through the destruction of her civilization, through storms and slavery and disease, only to give up when personal tragedy struck. Nymeria took command of the armies herself and continued the campaign. She proved to be as skilled a military commander as any in Dornish history. Nymeria understood that she could not defeat the Ironwoods through brute force alone. Instead, she employed a combination of military pressure and political maneuvering. She made alliances with houses that resented Ironwood dominance. She offered generous terms to lords who would swear fealty to her. She used her Rhoynar engineers to construct siege weapons that could crack even mountain fortresses. Following Mors's death, Nymeria remarried twice more, first to Lord Ulla of Hellholt, and then to Sir Davos Dane of Starfall. These marriages were clearly political in nature, designed to bring powerful houses into the Martell fold. Through these alliances, she isolated House Ironwood and gradually encircled their territories. 2 years after Mors fell in battle against Yorick Ironwood, Nymeria finally defeated her greatest enemy. King Yorick was not killed, but instead sent to the wall to join the Night's Watch, along with 5 other kings who had opposed Nymeria's rule: Vorian Dane, Garrison Fowler, Lucifer Dryland, Benedict Blackmont, and Albin Manwoody. By sending these defeated kings to the wall rather than executing them, Nymeria showed a kind of mercy, albeit one that effectively removed them from power forever. With the defeat of House Ironwood, the unification of Dorne was complete. For the first time in history, the entire peninsula was united under a single ruler. Nymeria chose Sunspear, the evolved form of the old Sandship, as her capital. From there she ruled as Princess of Dorne, adopting the Rhoynish title rather than calling herself Queen. Nymeria's rule as Princess of Dorne lasted for well over 2 decades. During this time, she fundamentally reshaped Dornish society. The Rhoynish customs she brought with her gradually merged with existing Dornish traditions, creating a unique culture that would set Dorne apart from the rest of Westeros for all time. The most significant of these changes was the adoption of equal primogeniture. In the rest of Westeros, titles and lands passed from father to eldest son, with daughters inheriting only if there were no male heirs. But the Rhoynar tradition, which Nymeria enforced in Dorne, held that the eldest child inherited regardless of gender. This meant women could rule in their own right, not merely as regents or dowagers. The Dornish also adopted Rhoynish attitudes towards certain social matters. They were more accepting of relationships outside of marriage. They did not stigmatize those born out of wedlock to the same degree as other Westerosi. While bastards in Dorne still took the surname Sand and did not inherit titles, they were often raised alongside legitimate children and given opportunities denied to bastards elsewhere in the Seven Kingdoms. Architecture changed as well. The Tower of the Sun and the Spear Tower at Sunspear were built in Rhoynish fashion, with design elements that would have been familiar to someone from Nisar or Croyne. Water gardens and fountains became common in Dornish palaces, bringing the Rhoynar's love of water to this dry land. Nymeria's legacy was so profound that her name became synonymous with Dornish identity. To this day, House Martell's full name is House Nymeria Martell, acknowledging their descent from the warrior queen. Many Dornish houses intermarried with the Rhoynar refugees, mixing bloodlines and cultures. 1,000 years later, Arya Stark would name her direwolf Nymeria, showing how far the warrior queen's reputation had spread. When Nymeria finally died, she was succeeded by her eldest child, a daughter she had borne to Mors Martell. This daughter became the Princess of Dorne in her own right, establishing the precedent that would govern Martell's succession for all the centuries to come. For several hundred years after Nymeria's death, House Martell ruled Dorne in relative peace. Oh, there were still conflicts with neighboring kingdoms, particularly the Reach and the Stormlands. The Dornish were famous, or infamous depending on who you asked, for their raiding and border wars. They even once captured Highgarden itself during one particularly daring campaign. But Dorne remained united, and the Martells remained its undisputed rulers. Then came Aegon Targaryen and his dragons. In the year Second, before the conquest, Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives Visenya and Rhaenys landed at the mouth of the Blackwater River with fewer than 3,000 soldiers and 3 dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes. What seemed like a fool's errand would become the conquest of 6 kingdoms and the forging of a new realm. Aegon sent ravens to all the major houses, demanding their submission. Most of those who resisted were crushed beneath dragonfire and Targaryen steel. But Dorne was different. At the time of Aegon's conquest, the ruling princess of Dorne was Elia Martell, known as the Yellow Toad of Dorne, though this nickname seems to have been based on her elderly appearance rather than any character flaw. Princess Meria was 80 years old, nearly blind and balding, but her mind remained sharp and her will unbending. Before Aegon began his conquest in earnest, Princess Meria sent him an offer. She proposed an alliance against the Storm Kings, suggesting that Dorne would help Aegon conquer the Stormlands. It was a clever proposal that would have given the Martells a powerful ally and potentially allowed them to expand their own territories at the expense of the Storm Kings. Aegon rejected the offer. He was not looking for alliances or negotiated agreements. He wanted complete submission, and he believed his dragons could force that submission from anyone, anywhere. Queen Rhaenys Targaryen, mounted on her dragon Meraxes, was sent to bring Dorne into the fold. She flew over the Prince's Pass, the main route through the Red Mountains from the Reach into Dorne. She expected to find Dornish armies defending this crucial passage. Instead, she found it empty. No soldiers, no resistance, just wind and stone. Confused but undeterred, Rhaenys continued to Vathon Godsgrace, 2 significant castles in Dorne. Both were abandoned, their lords and people nowhere to be found. At the Planky Town, the trading settlement at the mouth of the Greenblood, she found only women and children. The fighting men had melted away into the desert. Finally, Rhaenys reached Sunspear itself. The shadow city that surrounded the palace was half deserted. The palace stood mostly empty. In the throne room, she found Princess Elia Martell waiting for her, alone save for a few attendants. The meeting between these two remarkable women has been recorded in several histories, and the words exchanged have become famous. Rhaenys, secure in her power and her dragon, demanded that Dorne submit to Aegon's rule. Princess Meria's response was defiant and memorable. "You may burn us, but you will not bend us, break us, or make us bow. This is Dorne. You are not wanted here. Return at your peril." Rhaenys warned that she would return with fire and blood, the words of House Targaryen. But for the moment, she departed without unleashing Meraxes upon Sunspear. She had accomplished nothing, and the Dornish had given her nothing to fight. How do you conquer an enemy who refuses to meet you in battle? How do you threaten people who have already hidden where your greatest weapons cannot easily reach them? Rhaenys returned to Aegon, who was still in the process of conquering the other kingdoms. For several years, Dorne remained untaken, while Aegon consolidated his rule over the rest of Westeros. He was crowned in Old Town and began the task of governing his new realm from King's Landing, which he was building at the site of his original landing. But Aegon had not forgotten Dorne, and he had not forgiven Princess Meria's defiance. In the year 4, after the conquest, he launched a full-scale invasion of Dorne, determined to complete the conquest of the Seven Kingdoms. This began the First Dornish War, a conflict that would last 9 years and proved to be the greatest failure of Aegon's reign. Aegon's plan for conquering Dorne involved a three-pronged attack that would crush any resistance through overwhelming force. He himself led an army of 30,000 men, including 2,000 knights and 300 lords and bannermen, through the Prince's Pass. Lord Orys Baratheon, the bastard of Balon Meadow and rumoured half-brother of Aegon, led another force of 1,000 knights up the treacherous Bone Way through the Red Mountains. Queen Rhaenys, mounted on Meraxes, would provide air support and burn any resistance to ash. The Dornish, under the leadership of Princess Meria, had learned from the fates of Harrenhal and the Field of Fire. They knew they could not defeat dragons in open battle. They knew that defending castles against dragonfire was futile. So they employed a strategy that would frustrate the Targaryens for nearly a decade. They simply refused to fight on Targaryen terms. As Aegon's massive army marched through the Prince's Pass, they found the path clear. But they also found the land scorched. The Dornish had burned their own crops and poisoned their own wells. They gave the invaders nothing to sustain themselves with. The Targaryen army had to carry all its own supplies, and in the desert heat, those supplies dwindled faster than expected. Rhaenys burned the planky town with Meraxes, just as she had threatened years before. She captured Lemonwood, Spotswood, and Stinkwater. But in each place, she found only old women and children. The fighting men were nowhere to be found. When she reached Sunspear, both the Shadow City and the palace were largely deserted. Princess Meria had vanished. Lord Orys Baratheon's force suffered the first major Dornish victory of the war. As they marched through the Bone Way, the Dornish launched a night attack. In the narrow passes of the mountains, the Targaryen advantage in numbers meant nothing. Dornish soldiers familiar with every rock and ravine struck from above. raining down arrows and rocks. They attacked in the darkness when the Targaryens could barely see their enemies, then vanished before dawn. Orys was captured, along with many notable lords. His sword hand was cut off. The Dornish held him and the other prisoners hostage, using them as leverage against further Targaryen aggression. Despite these setbacks, Aegon proclaimed victory. He named Lord Rosby as Royal Viceroy of Sunspear and stationed an army under Lord Harlan Tyrell to keep the peace. He declared Dorne conquered and returned to King's Landing, confident that the matter was settled. The Dornish had other ideas. As soon as the main Targaryen forces withdrew, the Dornish insurgency began. Every night, Targaryen soldiers were found with their throats cut. Supply lines were constantly harassed. Wells were poisoned. Messengers disappeared without trace. The Targaryen occupation forces found themselves under siege in the very castles they had captured. Lord Rosby lasted only a fortnight before he was found dead in Sunspear. His replacement fared no better. The position of Viceroy of Sunspear became a death sentence. No castle was safe, no garrison secure. The Dornish were everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning and vanishing into the desert. Aegon and his sisters tried everything to break Dornish resistance. They burned castles, they burned towns. They made examples of captured Dornish fighters. In the year 8, after the conquest, Dornish raiders allied with a pirate king from the Stepstones crossed the Sea of Dorne and attacked the Stormlands, sacking towns and setting fires that spread through the Rainwood. Queen Visenya responded by burning Lemonwood, Ghost Hill, and the Tor with her dragon Vhagar. The war became increasingly brutal. In the year 10, after the conquest, tragedy struck the Targaryens. At a place that would become known as the Hellholt, Meraxes was brought down by a lucky shot from a scorpion bolt. The giant projectile pierced the dragon's eye, killing it instantly. Meraxes fell from the sky, and Queen Rhaenys died in the crash, or in the fire that consumed her afterward. Her body was never recovered. The death of Rhaenys and Meraxes changed the nature of the war. Aegon and Visenya's grief transformed into rage. They unleashed fire and blood on Dorne with renewed fury. Every castle in Dorne except Sunspear and its Shadow City was burned at least once. The entire peninsula became a charred wasteland from the Red Mountains to the mouth of the Greenblood. And still, the Dornish would not submit. Princess Nymeria remained hidden, coordinating the resistance from secret locations. Her people suffered terribly, but they did not break. In the year 13, after the conquest, Princess Nymeria died in her bed, presumably of old age. She had outlasted Aegon's patience and Rhaenys' life. Her son, Prince Nymor, became the new ruler of Dorne. Unlike his mother, Nymor was tired of war. He wanted peace, but he wanted it on his own terms. Nymor sent his daughter, Princess Daria, to King's Landing as a peace envoy. She brought with her a delegation and 2 items: the skull of Meraxes and a letter from Prince Nymor addressed to King Aegon personally. When Princess Daria arrived in the capital, many courtiers were outraged. The sight of Meraxes' skull angered Queen Visenya and Lord Orys Baratheon, who had been returned from captivity minus his sword hand. But Aegon allowed the delegation to present their offer. Prince Nymor wanted peace, but he would not submit to the Iron Throne. Dorne would remain independent. Aegon's first response was to reject this offer absolutely. But then Princess Daria handed him the letter from her father. Aegon read it while seated on the Iron Throne, and those present reported that his hand dripped blood, apparently from gripping the bladed throne too tightly. What was in that letter? No one knows. Aegon never revealed its contents, and if he kept a copy, it was lost long ago. Speculation has ranged from threats about Rhaenys' fate to revelations about her survival, to promises of continued insurgency to mystical warnings. The truth is lost to history. Whatever the letter contained, it changed Aegon's mind. He flew alone to Dragonstone on Balerion that very night. He returned the next morning and announced that he would accept Prince Nymer's peace terms. Dorne would remain independent. The First Dornish War was over. The peace held for the remainder of Aegon's reign, and through the reigns of his sons, Aenys I and Maegor the Cruel. There were still border conflicts and raids, particularly in the Dornish marches, where Reach and Stormlands met Dorne. But there were no more attempts at conquest, no more dragons burning Dornish castles. House Martell had achieved what no other kingdom had managed. They had resisted the might of the Targaryen dragons and preserved their independence. The words they had chosen for their house, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, had been proven true in fire and blood. But the Targaryens did not forget Dorne. For over a century after Aegon's death, his descendants would make repeated attempts to bring the defiant principality under their rule. Each attempt would fail, though some came closer to success than others. The most notable of these attempts came during the reign of Daeron I, known as Daeron the Young Dragon, in the year 157. After the conquest, the 14-year-old king decided that the time had come to complete what Aegon the Conqueror had started. When his counselors pointed out that he lacked the dragons that Aegon had possessed, the young king's response was bold and proud. "You have a dragon. He stands before you." Daeron's conquest of Dorne was actually a stunning military success, at least initially. The young king personally led one of 3 armies into Dorne, taking the treacherous Boneway through goat tracks that were barely passable. Lord Lyonel Tyrell led another host through the Prince's Pass, engaging the main Dornish forces there. While the Dornish strength was occupied in the west, Lord Alyn Velaryon, called Oakenfist, led the Targaryen fleet in a brilliant maneuver. Oakenfist sailed around Dorne's eastern coast and landed forces at the mouth of the Greenblood, where most of Dorne's population was concentrated. With the Dornish armies in the west facing Tyrell, the eastern castles were lightly defended. The fleet sailed up the Greenblood, taking castle after castle. In the year 158, after the conquest, the Prince of Dorne and 40 of the most powerful Dornish lords bent the knee in what became known as the submission of Sunspear. For the first time in history, all 7 kingdoms were under Targaryen rule in fact as well as in name. King Daeron wrote a book about his conquest, titled simply The Conquest of Dorne. In it, he exaggerated Dornish strength to make his victory seem more impressive, and downplayed the importance of Oakenfist's naval campaign, while emphasizing his own march through the Boneway. Despite these embellishments, the conquest was a remarkable achievement for one so young. Daeron left Lord Lyonel Tyrell as his governor in Dorne, and returned to King's Landing with Dornish hostages to ensure continued loyalty. It seemed the Martells had finally been conquered, and Dorne had finally been brought into the realm. But as Aegon the Conqueror had learned, conquering Dorne and holding it were 2 very different things. The Dornish might have bent the knee, but they had not submitted in their hearts. Within weeks of Daeron's departure, rebellion erupted across the principality. The insurgency that had frustrated Aegon returned with renewed intensity. Lord Lyonel Tyrell attempted to chase down rebels and restore order, but the Dornish were fighting on their home ground with tactics refined over centuries. In a particularly famous incident, Lord Tyrell was killed at Sandstone when he pulled the sash of a heavy velvet canopy above his bed, and 100 scorpions hidden in the canopy fell upon him, stinging him to death. The young dragon was forced to return to Dorne in the year 160, after the conquest, to resume the war. For another year, brutal fighting continued. Dorne himself was wounded more than once. His cousin, Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight, was hit by a poisoned arrow meant for the king and had to be sent home to recover. In the year 161, after the conquest, King Dorne I, still only 18 years old, was murdered during peace negotiations under a flag of truce. His entire retinue was killed with him. The conquest that had lasted only a summer had cost 10,000 men to achieve and another 40 to 50,000 to maintain. All of it was for nothing. Within a fortnight of Dorne's death, every Targaryen soldier had been expelled from Dorne, and the Martells ruled independently once more. Dorne's successor, his brother Baelor the Blessed, wanted peace with Dorne rather than continued war. In one of the acts that would earn him his reputation for piety, Baelor walked the Bone Way barefoot from King's Landing to Sunspear. Along the way, he freed Dornish hostages and treated all he met with respect and gentleness. At Sunspear, Baelor negotiated with the Prince of Dorne and arranged a marriage alliance. Prince Dorne, Baelor's cousin, who would eventually become King Dorne II, was betrothed to Princess Elia Martell, the eldest child of the Prince of Dorne. It was the first step toward bringing Dorne into the realm through marriage rather than conquest. On his way home, Baelor stopped at Weil, where his cousin Aemon the Dragon Knight was being held prisoner in a cage above a pit of vipers. Lord Weil gave Baelor the key to the cage. Songs say the vipers bowed their heads before Baelor's purity and refused to bite him. The truth was more prosaic. Baelor was bitten repeatedly and collapsed before Aemon could pull him to safety. But he survived, and the rescue became another of the legends surrounding the Blessed King. The marriage between Dorne and Nymeria took place in the year 170. After the conquest, it was a grand affair, and it brought Dornish influence to the royal court for the first time. Princess Nymeria brought many of her countrymen with her to King's Landing, and they introduced Dornish customs, foods, fashions, and attitudes to the capital. Some at court welcomed this exotic influence. Others resented it deeply. But this was still not the final unification of Dorne with the Seven Kingdoms. That would require another marriage and another generation. When Dorne II became king in the year 184, after the conquest, he inherited a realm still fractured in some ways. His father, Aegon IV, called Aegon the Unworthy, had been a terrible king whose reign was marked by corruption, cruelty, and numerous illegitimate children whom he had legitimized on his deathbed. These legitimized bastards, particularly Demon Blackfyre, would become a threat to Dorne's rule. But Dorne also inherited something valuable: a Dornish wife whom he genuinely loved, and a strong relationship with House Martell through that marriage. His wife Nyria's brother, Prince Maron, ruled in Sunspear. The two kings, one of the Seven Kingdoms and one of Dorne, were brothers by marriage and friends by choice. Early in his reign, Dorne began negotiations with Maron to finally bring Dorne under the authority of the Iron Throne. These negotiations lasted 2 years, showing the care and patience both rulers brought to the matter. The treaty they eventually agreed upon included significant concessions to Dornish autonomy. House Martell would retain the title of Prince and Princess, unlike other great houses who were merely lords. Dorne would maintain its own laws, including its practices regarding inheritance and succession that differed from the rest of Westeros. The Martells would collect their own taxes with only irregular oversight from the crown. Dorne would be part of the Seven Kingdoms, but it would remain distinctly Dornish. The final piece of the agreement was another marriage. Daeron's sister, Princess Daenerys Targaryen, would wed Prince Oberyn Martell. This Daenerys had been born in the year 182, after the conquest, making her 17 years old when the marriage was finalized. There were complications to this match. Rumors suggested that Princess Daenerys had been in love with her bastard half-brother, Daemon Blackfyre, and that she was being forced into a political marriage she did not want. Some whispered that King Daeron was selling his sister to the Prince of Dorne to secure an alliance. These whispers would become one of the many grievances that led to the First Blackfyre Rebellion. But if Daenerys was unhappy with the match, she did her duty. The wedding took place in King's Landing in the year 187, after the conquest. After the ceremony, Prince Meryn knelt before the Iron Throne and swore his oath of fealty to King Daeron. The king raised him up, and together they rode to the great sept of Baelor. At the sept, they placed a golden wreath before the statue of Baelor the Blessed and spoke words that honored the king who had started this process decades before. Baelor, your work is done. For the first time since Aegon the Conqueror had landed at the mouth of the Blackwater nearly 2 centuries earlier, all of Westeros from the Wall to the Summer Sea was united under a single ruler, and it had been accomplished not through fire and blood, but through patient diplomacy and marriage. To celebrate the peaceful unification, King Daeron founded a new palace in the Dornish Marches, near where the boundaries of Dorne, the Reach, and the Stormlands met. He called it Summerhall, and it was lightly fortified, more palace than castle, a symbol of the new peace between regions that had warred for centuries. Prince Meryn, now a vassal of the Iron Throne, built a gift for his new bride. The water gardens were constructed near Sunspear, a place of beauty with coloured marble, flowing pools, and lush vegetation kept green through clever engineering. It was meant to offer Princess Daenerys respite from the dust and heat of the Dornish desert, a cool refuge where she could find comfort. The water gardens would become one of the most beloved places in all of Dorne, used by later Martell rulers not just for themselves, but as a place where highborn and lowborn children could play together, a reflection of the egalitarian principles that had come to Dorne with Nymeria 1,000 years before. Daenerys lived in Dorne for the rest of her life, which sadly was not long. She died in her 20th year, around 202, after the conquest. Whether her marriage to Meryn was happy, or whether she spent her days mourning the loss of Daemon Blackfyre, we cannot know. But through her sacrifice, if sacrifice it was, Dorne and the Iron Throne were finally united. Not everyone was pleased with this unification. Certain lords, particularly Marcher lords, who had spent generations fighting the Dornish, resented the peace. They disliked the special privileges granted to House Martell. They were suspicious of the many Dornishmen King Daeron brought to court, some of whom were given significant positions. These resentments became part of the fuel that fed the First Blackfyre Rebellion. In the year 196, after the conquest, Daemon Blackfyre raised his banner in rebellion against his half-brother King Daeron. He claimed the Iron Throne should be his by right, arguing that Daeron was not truly Aegon IV's son, but rather a bastard fathered by Aemon the Dragon Knight on Queen Nymeria. When the realm chose sides in this conflict, House Martell remained loyal to the Targaryens. Dorne sent its spears to fight for King Daeron against the Blackfire Pretender. At the Battle of the Redgrass Field, Dornish soldiers fought and died for their new king. Their loyalty helped secure Daeron's victory, though the cost in blood was high. After the rebellion was crushed and Demon Blackfire lay dead on the field, the marriage between Daenerys and Meryn was carried out a year later in 197, after the conquest, fully formalizing Dorne's entry into the Seven Kingdoms. From that point forward, House Martell was one of the great houses sworn to the Iron Throne. They kept their unique title, their special privileges, and their distinct culture. But they were part of the realm, and their rulers attended court in King's Landing when called upon, and their soldiers marched when the king commanded. The unification had taken nearly 200 years from Aegon's first attempt. It had cost countless lives in war and rebellion, but it had finally been achieved, and remarkably, it had been done peacefully in the end, through marriage and negotiation rather than dragonfire. For the next century and more, House Martell remained one of the great houses of the realm. They attended court, married into other great houses, and occasionally played significant roles in the political machinations of the Seven Kingdoms. During the reign of Aegon V, called Aegon the Unlikely, there was a Martell presence at the tragedy of Summerhall. That palace, built by Daeron II to celebrate peace with Dorne, became the site of one of the great disasters of Targaryen history. In the year 259, after the conquest, a fire at Summerhall killed many members of the royal family, including King Aegon himself. The exact details of what happened remain unclear, but it involved an attempt to hatch dragon eggs that went catastrophically wrong. The Martells continued their tradition of giving their children Rhoynish names alongside Westerosi ones. Many Martells bore names like Nymeria, Mors, Daria, and other names that echoed their Rhoynish heritage. This helped maintain their distinct cultural identity, even as they integrated more fully into the politics of the Seven Kingdoms. It's important to understand that despite being part of the realm, Dorne remained different. Their customs regarding inheritance meant that women could rule in their own right, and that the eldest child, regardless of gender, was the heir. This created situations where princesses ruled Dorne, while other great houses had only lords. The Dornish attitude toward relationships and children born outside of marriage also remained more permissive than elsewhere in Westeros. Bastards were still called sand and could not inherit titles, but they were not shunned or hidden away to the same degree as in other kingdoms. Many lords and ladies openly acknowledged their bastard children and raised them alongside their legitimate offspring. This cultural difference would become crucial to understanding the role House Martell played in the events leading up to Robert's Rebellion. In the middle decades of the 3rd century after the conquest, the ruling Princess of Dorne had 3 children who lived to adulthood: Doran, the eldest, and his younger siblings Elia and Oberyn. There were also 2 other brothers, Mors and Oliver, but both died in infancy. Princess Elia Martell was born 9 years after her brother Doran and 1 year before her brother Oberyn. From birth, she was delicate in health, having been born a month premature. The Maesters doubted she would survive infancy, but she proved more resilient than expected, though her constitution remained fragile throughout her life. Despite her health issues, Elia was considered beautiful and was known for her gentle, kind nature. Her brother Oberyn, only a year younger, became fiercely protective of her. The two were extremely close throughout their childhood and into their teenage years. When Elia and Oberyn were 15 and 16 years old, they travelled with their mother on a tour of potential marriage alliances. They visited Starfall, the Arbor, Old Town, the Shield Islands, and Crakehall. Oberyn spent much of this time mocking Elia's potential suitors. At Old Town, Elia met Baelor Hightower and was half in love with him until he made the mistake of farting in the presence of both Martells. Oberyn immediately dubbed him Baelor Breakwind, and Elia could never look at him again without laughing. The final stop on their journey was Casterly Rock. This was meant to be special, as their mother had been close friends with Lady Joanna Lannister, who had served with her as ladies in waiting to Queen Rhaella Targaryen. The plan, apparently, was to arrange marriages between the Martell and Lannister children. But when they arrived at Casterly Rock, they learned that Lady Joanna had died in childbirth. Lord Tywin Lannister kept them waiting for weeks before finally granting them an audience. When he did, the meeting was disastrous. According to Oberyn's later account, Tywin offered the newborn Tyrion, a dwarf baby whose birth had killed Joanna, as a potential husband for Elia. This was seen as a grotesque insult, and the Martells departed Casterly Rock with their pride wounded and no marriage alliance secured. Instead, Elia's marriage was arranged by King Aerys II Targaryen. In the year 279, after the conquest, she was betrothed to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the heir to the Iron Throne. They were wed the following year. This match was itself complicated by politics. Lord Tywin Lannister had hoped to marry his daughter Cersei to Rhaegar, and when Aerys chose Elia instead, it was seen as another slight to the Lannisters. Tywin resigned as Hand of the King partly in response to this rejection. Elia and Rhaegar's marriage produced 2 children. First came a daughter, Rhaenys, and then a son, Aegon. Both pregnancies were extremely difficult for Elia. After Rhaenys was born, Elia was bedridden for half a year. Aegon's birth nearly killed her, and the Maesters told Rhaegar afterward that Elia would likely not survive another pregnancy. According to those who knew her, Elia loved her husband deeply and was a devoted mother to her children. She took care of them personally, rather than leaving them entirely to wet nurses and servants, which was unusual for highborn ladies. Her brother Oberyn later spoke of how much Elia loved her family and how happy she seemed despite her health challenges. But then came the tourney at Harrenhal in the year 281. After the conquest, this tourney was one of the most significant events in the years leading up to Robert's rebellion, though its full importance would only become clear later. Prince Rhaegar participated in the jousting, and against all expectations, he won the tournament, unhorsing even seasoned champions. As the victor, Rhaegar had the privilege of crowning the Queen of Love and Beauty, which by all rites and customs should have been his own wife. Instead, Rhaegar rode past Elia and placed the crown of winter roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark, the betrothed of Robert Baratheon. This shocking breach of etiquette scandalized the realm. Elia was humiliated publicly. Oberyn later spoke of how this hurt his sister, though she tried to bear it with grace. But worse was to come. A year later, in 282, after the conquest, Prince Rhaegar apparently abducted Lyanna Stark. Whether it was truly an abduction or an elopement, and what exactly happened between them, remains one of the great mysteries of that era. But the result was clear. Robert Baratheon, Lyanna's betrothed, was furious. Lyanna's brother Brandon rode to King's Landing demanding Rhaegar come out and die. King Aerys, who had descended into complete madness by this point, arrested Brandon and had his father Rickard Stark summoned to court. Then Aerys, in one of the acts that would cement his reputation as the Mad King, murdered both Brandon and Rickard in horrific fashion. He demanded that Jon Arryn, who had fostered both Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, turn over his wards to be executed as well. Instead, Jon Arryn raised his banners in rebellion, and Robert's rebellion, also called the War of the Usurper, began. During the war, House Martell remained loyal to the Targaryens, though not without resentment. Prince Doran was furious at how Rhaegar had treated his sister. The fact that Rhaegar had set Elia aside, publicly humiliated her, and then run off with another woman while leaving Elia and her children in King's Landing, was seen as unconscionable. But King Aerys ensured Dornish loyalty through hostage-taking. He kept Elia and her children in the Red Keep, making it clear that they would suffer if Dorne betrayed him. Not that this was necessary. As Oberyn later said, no true Dornishman would ever take up arms against their beloved princess. They would fight to the death for whatever side she was on. Dorne sent 10,000 spears to support the Targaryen cause. They fought at the Battle of the Trident, where Prince Oberyn Martell of the Kingsguard died defending Rhaegar. Rhaegar himself fell to Robert's warhammer at that battle, dying in the Ruby Ford of the Trident River. After the Trident, the war was essentially over. The Targaryen armies were shattered, and Robert Baratheon's forces marched on King's Landing. At this point, the outcome should have been clear, but Lord Tywin Lannister had remained neutral throughout the war, waiting to see which side would win. Now, with the Targaryens clearly defeated, Tywin marched his forces to King's Landing and presented himself as Robert's ally. King Aerys, in his madness, believed Tywin was coming to help him. He ordered the city gates open to the Lannister forces. What followed was the sack of King's Landing, one of the darkest moments in Westerosi history. Lannister soldiers poured through the city, killing and looting, and in the Red Keep, a terrible crime was committed. Sir Gregor Clegane, known as the Mountain That Rides, and Sir Amory Lorch, two of Tywin's most brutal knights, scaled the walls of Maegor's Holdfast, where Elia and her children had taken refuge. Amory Lorch broke down the door and found Princess Rhaenys hiding under her father's bed. He dragged the screaming 3-year-old out and stabbed her over 50 times. Gregor Clegane was even more monstrous. He murdered baby Aegon by smashing the infant's head against a wall while Elia watched. Then Clegane raped Elia and finally killed her as well. The precise circumstances around these murders have been debated. Some say Aerys ordered it in his final madness when he learned of the Lannister betrayal. Others claim Tywin ordered it to prove his loyalty to Robert's cause by eliminating potential Targaryen heirs. Tywin himself later claimed he had ordered the children's deaths, but not Elia's, and not the manner of Aegon's killing. Whatever the truth, the result was the complete destruction of Elia Martell's family. She was raped and murdered. Her children were brutally killed, and when Robert Baratheon saw the bodies presented to him wrapped in Lannister cloaks, he approved of the deed, seeing it as necessary to secure his new regime. House Martell was devastated and furious. Prince Oberyn wanted to continue the war immediately, raising Dorne in support of the last Targaryen heir, Prince Viserys, who had escaped to Essos with his infant sister Daenerys. Secret messages were sent, plans were made, but Prince Doran, who had succeeded his mother as the ruler of Dorne, was more cautious. He met with Jon Arryn, Robert's new Hand of the King, who came to Sunspear personally. Arryn brought the body of Prince Oberyn Martell with full honours. He spoke of peace and the need to prevent further bloodshed. Doran agreed to keep the peace, and Oberyn's plans for war were set aside. But House Martell never forgave and never forgot. The Lannisters had murdered their princess and her children. Robert had approved of it. Tywin had likely ordered it, and none of them would ever face justice for these crimes. From that point forward, House Martell remained technically loyal to the Iron Throne, but pursued a policy of relative isolation. They rarely came to court in King's Landing. They maintained the minimum necessary diplomatic relations, but otherwise kept to themselves. And they harboured their resentment and desire for vengeance, waiting for the right moment to strike back at those who had wronged them. 17 years after Robert's rebellion, when the events of the main series begin, House Martell is ruled by Prince Oberyn Martell. He is in his 50s, suffering from severe gout that confines him to a wheelchair or sedan chair much of the time. His appearance of weakness and inaction masks a subtle, patient mind that has been planning vengeance for nearly 2 decades. Doran has 3 children. His eldest is Princess Arianne, beautiful and ambitious, the heir to Dorne under their laws of equal primogeniture. His second child is Quentyn, studious and earnest, but not as bold as his sister. The youngest is Trystane, still a boy when the series begins. Doran's wife is not Dornish, but a Norvoshi woman, which explains some of the tension in their family, and they have been separated for years. Doran's captain of guards is Areo Hotar, a Norvoshi warrior who wields a long axe and serves with unwavering loyalty. His closest advisor is Maester Caliot, but for all the people around him, Doran keeps his own counsel and plays his cards close to his chest. Doran's younger brother, Oberyn, called the Red Viper, is everything Doran appears not to be. Where Doran is cautious and patient, Oberyn is bold and impulsive. Where Doran sits quietly, Oberyn travels the world. Where Doran hides his feelings, Oberyn wears his emotions openly. Oberyn has lived an extraordinary life. In his youth, he was caught in bed with the paramour of Lord Edgar Ironwood, which resulted in a duel. The duel was to first blood, but afterward, Lord Ironwood died of a festering wound. Rumours spread that Oberyn had used a poison blade, earning him his nickname, the Red Viper. To keep peace with House Ironwood, Prince Doran sent his own son Quentyn to Ironwood as a ward, while Oberyn was sent away, first to Oldtown to study at the Citadel, and then to Lys in Essos. At the Citadel, Oberyn forged 6 links of a Maester's chain before growing bored and abandoning his studies. In Essos, he travelled widely, joined the Second Son's sellsword company for a time, founded his own company, and studied poisons extensively. Oberyn has 8 daughters by various women, all of them bastards and all known as the Sand Snakes. The 4 eldest are Obara, Nymeria called Nym, Tyene, and Serella. Each has a different mother and different skills, but all have inherited their father's fierce spirit. The 4 youngest are daughters of Ellaria Sand, Oberyn's current paramour. When King Robert Baratheon dies and the War of the 5 Kings erupts, House Martell initially remains neutral. They have no love for the Baratheons or Lannisters, but they also have no particular reason to support Robb Stark or Stannis Baratheon. But then Tyrion Lannister, serving as Hand of the King for his nephew Joffrey, makes a clever political move. He offers to send the Princess Myrcella Baratheon, Joffrey's sister, to Dorne. She will be betrothed to Prince Trystane, Doran's youngest son. Doran will receive a seat on the small council. The Lannisters will give Dorne lands in the Dornish marches, taken from lords who supported Stannis, and Tyrion promises that those responsible for Elia's death will face justice. Doran accepts this offer, seeing it as advantageous to have the potential heir to the Iron Throne in Dornish custody. Princess Myrcella is sent to Sunspear with Sir Aris Oakheart of the Kingsguard as her sworn shield. Oberyn, meanwhile, travels to King's Landing to take Dorne's seat on the small council. He arrives with Elia Sand and makes his presence felt immediately, making it clear he has come seeking vengeance for Elia. When King Joffrey dies at his own wedding, poisoned by persons unknown, Oberyn is initially suspected due to his knowledge of poisons. Then Tyrion is accused of Joffrey's murder and put on trial. The trial is a farce, with witness after witness providing damning testimony, much of it false or distorted. When Tyrion demands a trial by combat, his father Tywin chooses Sir Gregor Clegane as the crown's champion. This is the moment Oberyn has been waiting for. He volunteers to be Tyrion's champion, not out of any great love for the dwarf, but because it gives him the chance to face the mountain in combat. Before the duel, Oberyn makes Tyrion tell him the truth about Elia's death, learning that Gregor killed Elia and Aegon, while Amry Lorch killed Rhaenys. The duel that follows is one of the most famous combats in recent Westerosi history. Oberyn fights with a spear tipped with poison, using his superior speed and skill to wound Gregor repeatedly. He pierces the mountain's shoulder, his leg, and other places. Gregor falls, and it seems Oberyn has won. But Oberyn's need for vengeance overrides his caution. Instead of finishing Gregor quickly, he demands that the mountain confess. He screams at Gregor to admit that he killed Elia and her children, to admit that he did it on Tywin Lannister's orders. He wants everyone in King's Landing to hear the truth. This hesitation proves fatal. Gregor trips Oberyn and grabs him. In a horrifying echo of how he killed baby Aegon, Gregor crushes Oberyn's skull with his bare hands, but not before roaring out his confession for all to hear. Yes, he killed Elia. Yes, he killed her children. Yes, he raped her. Oberyn dies, and with his death, Tyrion is condemned. The Dornish are outraged. The Sand Snakes demand war against the Lannisters. But Prince Doran refuses, as he has refused every call for war since Robert's rebellion ended. In the books, Doran's refusal to act leads to increasing tension in Dorne. Princess Arianne, his eldest daughter and heir, becomes involved in a plot to crown Princess Myrcella as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, arguing that under Dornish law, as the elder sibling, she has a better claim than her younger brother Tommen. This plot fails, and Doran arrests his own daughter to prevent further conflict. Only then does Doran reveal to Arianne what he has really been planning all these years. He has not been idle. He has been patient, playing the long game. He had signed a secret pact years ago with the exiled Viserys Targaryen, planning to wed Arianne to Viserys and help restore the Targaryens to power. When Viserys died, those plans shifted to his sister Daenerys. Doran sent his son Quentyn across the world to Meereen to find Daenerys and propose marriage. This is the vengeance Doran has been plotting. Not immediate war that Dorne cannot win, but a careful, patient plan to destroy the Lannisters and Baratheons by restoring the Targaryen dynasty. Vengeance served cold, as the saying goes. In the television adaptation, the story of House Martell takes a different turn. After Oberyn's death, Elia Sand and the three eldest Sand Snakes, Obara, Nymeria, and Tyene become radicalized. They murder Prince Dorne and his son Trystane, committing kinslaying and usurping control of Dorne. They ally with Daenerys Targaryen not out of Doran's careful planning, but out of their own desire for revenge against the Lannisters. This alliance ultimately leads to disaster. Euron Greyjoy's fleet captures or kills Ellaria and the 3 eldest Sand Snakes. The Dornish forces that sailed for Daenerys are destroyed. By the end of the series, an unnamed new Prince of Dorne appears briefly, but House Martell's story has been effectively concluded, with most of its major characters dead. As we reflect on the complete history of House Martell, certain patterns and themes emerge that help us understand their significance in the broader tapestry of Westerosi history. First and foremost is the theme of resistance and independence. From the moment Nymeria burned her ships on the beach, House Martell has represented a refusal to submit to outside authority unless it serves their interests. They resisted Aegon the Conqueror when every other kingdom fell. They outlasted Daeron the Young Dragon. They joined the realm only on their own terms, maintaining privileges and autonomy that other great houses do not possess. This independence is reflected in their words: unbowed, unbent, unbroken. These are not just empty phrases, but a genuine reflection of Martell history. They have never been truly conquered. Even when they joined the 7 kingdoms, it was through marriage and negotiation, not submission at the point of a sword or under the shadow of dragon wings. Second is the lasting influence of Nymeria and Rhoynish culture on Dornish identity. The Rhoynar came to Westeros 1,000 years before the main story, but their impact remains fundamental to how Dorne operates. The practice of equal primogeniture, allowing women to inherit and rule in their own right, sets Dorne apart from every other region in Westeros. The more permissive attitudes towards sexuality and relationships outside of marriage create a culture that other Westerosi often view as exotic or even scandalous. Nymeria herself has become a legendary figure, not just in Dorne but throughout the 7 kingdoms. She represents female leadership, strategic brilliance, and the ability to turn disaster into opportunity. That Arya Stark, a girl from the north who has never been to Dorne, would name her direwolf after Nymeria shows how far the warrior queen's reputation has spread. Third is the theme of patience and long-term planning. This is best embodied by Oberyn Martell, who appears weak and inactive, but is actually playing a game that spans decades. While Oberyn represents immediate action and passionate vengeance, Dorne represents the other side of the Martell character: careful calculation, patience, and the willingness to wait for the perfect moment. Doran's quote comparing himself to grass, while Oberyn is the viper, captures this perfectly. Oberyn was ever the viper, deadly, dangerous, unpredictable. No man dared tread on him. I was the grass, pleasant, complacent, sweet-smelling, swaying with every breeze. Who fears to walk upon the grass? But it is the grass that hides the viper from his enemies and shelters him until he strikes. This combination of bold action and patient planning has served House Martell well throughout its history. Nymeria herself embodied both traits. She was bold enough to burn her ships and wage a war of conquest, but patient enough to wait years for the right alliances and opportunities. Fourth is the tragedy that seems to follow the Martells despite their strengths. Elia's murder and the deaths of her children represent not just a personal tragedy for House Martell, but a failure of justice in Westeros. That such crimes could be committed against a princess and go unpunished speaks to the brutality of Westerosi politics and the limitations of honor in a world where power often trumps justice. Oberyn's death follows a similar pattern. He had the mountain beaten, had achieved his moment of vengeance, but his need to hear the confession, to have justice publicly acknowledged, led to his downfall. In a way, this desire for justice and public acknowledgement of wrongs is very Dornish. They want not just vengeance, but vindication, not just victory, but recognition. The geographic location of Dorne, separated from the rest of Westeros by the Red Mountains and the harsh desert climate, has allowed House Martell to maintain their distinct identity. Invading armies find the terrain hostile and the defenders elusive. This geographic advantage has been crucial to Dornish independence throughout history. The Water Gardens, built by Oberyn Martell for his Targaryen bride, represent another aspect of Dornish culture, the belief that highborn and lowborn children should play together. Dorne later opens the Water Gardens to the children of Dorne, regardless of their birth, allowing them to enjoy its pools and fountains. This relatively egalitarian approach, again rooted in Rhoynish tradition, sets Dorne apart from the rigid class structures found in other kingdoms. The Sand Snakes, Oberyn's bastard daughters, further illustrate this point. In most of Westeros, bastards are hidden away or at best tolerated. But Oberyn openly acknowledged all 8 of his daughters and trained them in various martial and intellectual skills. They are not ashamed of their status as bastards. Indeed, they seem to wear it as a badge of pride, proof of their father's passionate nature and their own independence from conventional expectations. The relationship between House Martell and House Ironwood also bears examination. The Ironwoods were once the most powerful house in Dorne, the kings who challenged Nymeria and Mors Martell for dominance. Though they have been vassals of the Martells for 1,000 years, there remains an undercurrent of rivalry and resentment. The duel between Oberyn and Edgar Ironwood, and the subsequent decision to send Quentyn Martell as a ward to Ironwood, shows how carefully the Martells must manage their relationships with their most powerful bannermen. This internal Dornish politics adds another layer to House Martell's story. They are not just players in the Game of Thrones across all of Westeros. They must also maintain their own power base within Dorne, balancing the various houses and factions that make up their principality. The Martell approach to dragons is particularly interesting. They are the only great house that successfully resisted dragons in Aegon's time. They killed one of the 3 great dragons, Meraxes, and its rider, Queen Rhaenys. Yet they later allied with the Targaryens through marriage and remained loyal to them through multiple rebellions. When Daenerys Targaryen emerges with her 3 dragons, the Martells seek alliance with her as well, showing a pragmatic approach to power rather than a reflexive fear or hatred of dragons. The religious landscape of Dorne is also worth noting. While the faith of the Seven is practiced in Dorne as in most of Westeros, the Dornish seem less rigidly devoted to it than, say, the people of the Reach or the Riverlands. This may be another legacy of their Rhoynish heritage, as the Rhoynar had their own gods and traditions. The Martells do not use the faith as a tool of political power the way some other houses do, and Dornish society is generally more secular in character. Looking at the marriages the Martells have made over the centuries also reveals their political strategy. They have married Targaryens, Danes, Ironwoods, and other significant houses. Through these alliances, they have woven themselves into the fabric of Westerosi nobility while maintaining their distinct identity. The fact that Martell rulers kept the title of Prince and Princess even after joining the Seven Kingdoms shows their success in preserving their unique status. The architecture of Sunspear itself tells the story of House Martell. The old sandship, the original Martell seat, still stands as the Old Palace. The Spear Tower and the Tower of the Sun were built in Rhoynish fashion after Nymeria's arrival. The triple towers represent the three great branches of Dornish influence: the sandy Dornishmen, who resemble the Rhoynar; the salty Dornishmen of the coast, who have more Andal features; and the stony Dornishmen of the mountains, who retain more First Men blood. The shadow city that surrounds Sunspear, built in mud brick and low buildings to combat the heat, shows the practical Dornish approach to their environment. It is not as grand as King's Landing or Old Town, but it is perfectly suited to its desert climate. And so, we come to the end of our journey through the history of House Martell, from the humble Andal adventurer Morgan to the complex political players of the modern era. We have walked the hot sands of Dorne, watched 10,000 ships burn on the beach, witnessed the unification of a fractured land, and seen the only kingdom in Westeros successfully resist the might of dragons. House Martell's story is one of adaptation and persistence. They adapted when Nymeria arrived, seeing opportunity rather than threat. They adapted to Targaryen rule, maintaining their independence even while joining the realm. They adapted to the Baratheon regime after Robert's rebellion, biding their time and planning their revenge. Their sigil, that red sun pierced by a golden spear, symbolizes both the harshness of their land and the strength of their spirit. The sun represents the burning desert that has protected them from invaders for millennia. The spear represents their military prowess and their refusal to submit. Together, they create an image of power, resilience, and defiance. Their words, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, are not just a motto, but a promise that has been kept for 1,000 years. Through war and peace, through conquest and alliance, through tragedy and triumph, House Martell has remained true to these words. As you drift off to sleep tonight, imagine yourself in the water gardens of Sunspear. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that match the Martell colors. The heat of the day is fading, and cool water splashes in the fountains around you. Children are playing, their laughter echoing off the colored marble. In the distance, you can see the towers of Sunspear rising against the darkening sky, and beyond them, the endless desert stretching to the horizon. This is Dorne. This is the legacy of Nymeria and Mors Martell, of Dorne and Oberyn, of Elia and all the princes and princesses who have ruled from Sunspear. It is a land apart, a culture distinct, a people unbowed, unbent, and unbroken. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Martell history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the great houses of Westeros, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. It helps more than you might think. Leave a comment below telling me which house you'd like to explore next, or share your favorite moment from House Martell's long and storied history. Until next time, my dear adventurers, may your dreams be filled with desert winds and the whispers of ancient queens, and may you always remain unbowed, unbent, and unbroken. Sleep well.